everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Peggy Greenberg. My name is Sarah, I'll moderate the webinar. It will be about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can type them into the questions box. We'll be answering these questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or in an email if we do run out of time. And then also note we have handouts that can be downloaded through GoToWebinar directly. They are located in the Handouts tab in your dashboard. So welcome, Peggy, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. As Sarah said, my name is Peggy Greenberg, and I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about what's my communication style, how to get along with almost anyone. I'm delighted to be here. So I want to start off by showing you where we're headed today, our roadmap for today's session, if you will. And I know that if you're like me, you like to know how are we going to spend this time. So we're going to start out with some introductions, and then logically, I think it's very important to define what is communication, because it's a huge, big area. And so I want to make sure that we have some common definition of communication. And then we're going to talk about communication style. We all have a certain way of communicating, and you're going to have an opportunity here during this 1 hour session to self-identify what you think your communication style is. And once we get that determined, we're going to talk about what are some of the strengths of the 4 communication styles, and then also the flip side of that, what are some of the trouble spots that can occur with the 4 communication styles. We're going to talk about how do you interact with people, either individuals in your personal life or your work life, team members, your boss, anyone who might have a style that's different from your own. And chances are when we talk about this, you're going to recognize that you're one style, but maybe the people you work with, or perhaps your partner or your spouse or someone in your family is a style that's opposite from yours. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. And then how can you quickly gauge the style of new acquaintances? Because sometimes we don't have a lot of time to talk to someone or to listen to them or to get to know them very well, but we need to communicate with them. So what are some of the things that you can look for to quickly gauge the style of someone that's a new acquaintance to you? And hopefully at the end, we'll have a little time for some questions. So I want to start off, because it only seems right, since we're talking about communication, it seems appropriate that we first get to know a little bit about each other. So let me introduce myself a little bit so you know a little bit about who I am and where I've been and what I've done. Then I'm going to hopefully hear a little bit about you as well. So I worked as the director of training for various healthcare organizations within my career, and those were located in Boston, Baltimore, and finally in the Washington, D.C. area. And my final full-time position before I started my own training and consulting business is I was the director of the Office of Education and Training for the United States Senate. So we were responsible for all of the training and development of Senate staff throughout the country. Once I started my own practice, I have served as an executive coach and an organizational development consultant to many different types of organizations. I continue to do so, and I'm also an online moderator for business management and communication topics. So as you can see from my background, my work has involved a lot of communication with people at all levels in organizations and in many different types of organizations. And, you know, to me, above all the skills that are needed for personal and professional success, the ability to communicate effectively really, I think, is a core and perhaps the core competency. So the time that you're going to spend here this afternoon is an investment, and I think truly any time that you spend sharpening your communication skills is an investment in your future success. So again, that's another reason why I'm delighted to see all several hundred of you here this afternoon trying to do just that. So now I want to know a little bit about you, and I'm going to launch a couple of polls. We're going to start out with this first one, and I'd like you to tell me via the poll that Sarah's going to launch, what is the industry or the sector that your organization represents? And I know we don't have all possibilities up here, but go ahead and pick the one that's the closest for you. Make sure you hit submit after you answer that poll. All right. All right, it's looking like we have almost everyone there. We have most everyone represented here. So Sarah, if we can go ahead and close that poll now. And so it looks like government is winning out in terms of the major industries that you work, followed by, let's see, followed by financial, banking, and real estate. And then we have our friends from healthcare there in third position. And who do we have? High tech, telecom, IT in fourth, and finally manufacturing. And so again, you know, this is important information for me to have. I like to know where people are coming from so that we can really sort of gauge this and make this information relevant to you. So let's go ahead, and I want to launch a second poll now, and I want to know what your primary role is in your organization. So I know what industry you come from. So I want to know, what's your primary role in your organization? Are you a team member, a specialist, or a subject expert? Are you a supervisor? Are you a project or team or a unit manager of some type? Are you in middle management, or are you from upper management or an executive level person? So once again, if everybody could just go ahead, and Sarah's going to launch that poll for us so we can find out what's your primary role in your organization. Sarah, can we get that poll?
Yep, Peggy, it should be up now.
Okay.
People are voting up at 85.
Okay.
That's fine. I can go ahead and close it. It's fine. We have about 87% already voted. So just give it a couple little bit more seconds.
All right.
All right, I'll go ahead and close it. And it looks like 52% are coming at team member, specialist, or subject expert, 10% for supervisor, 12% for project team unit manager, 14% for mid-management, and 13% for upper management.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks, everybody. Again, it's good to know. It looks like most of you are coming from the team member, specialist, or subject expert area, with some of you also holding different types of management positions within your organization. So again, important information for me to know, and hopefully we can address communication in a way that's meaningful for all of you, no matter what sector, what part of the universe you come from in terms of the type of organization, and also no matter what type of job you come from as well. So the first question is, what is communication? And obviously, you know, this is a huge topic. It's an incredibly big topic, and communication is obviously a big part of all that we do. And, you know, there are countless definitions of communication, but the ones that I think really summarize the biggest part of that human experience is that, first of all, communication is a process of attempting to create shared understanding. And you'll notice that I say attempting to create shared understanding, because really, until we get feedback on whether our message was received the way that we intended it, it's only that. It's an attempt, and the thread that connects this is feedback. So it's an attempt at creating shared understanding. It's both verbal and nonverbal. So it's not just what you say, but how you say it. And we've all experienced this, I'm certain. Maybe even this morning, or at some point during today, maybe this morning you said to someone good morning, to a coworker, or someone, you know, on your way into work, or maybe even someone in your family, and they said good morning back. But their tone of voice, the way that they looked, told you that it was anything but a good morning. And, maybe they woke up on the wrong side of the bed, or maybe they had a bad commute in if they were coming into the office. So, it's actually been noted in communication research that we actually believe nonverbal communication significantly more than verbal communication. So although that person said good morning back to you, what you took from that exchange was the fact that it wasn't a good morning for them, or it hadn't been an entirely good morning for them. And the third thing that communication is, it's a simultaneous assigning of meaning. So as soon as you put a thought, a feeling, a word out there, it immediately is interpreted by someone else. It happens simultaneously. And as we all know, and maybe we've all experienced the downside of the fact that once you say something, once you put some communication out, you can't really take it back. Maybe you tried to do that as a child. I know I certainly did. And you can't take it back because there's a simultaneous assigning of meaning that goes on when we communicate. So now that we have put some definition to communication, I want to share with you some key principles about communication. And the first one is what I was just talking about. Communication occurs when a sent message is received, okay? And the message that is received very often might not be the same as the one that is sent, all right? And the reason for that is that when you send communication, it goes through the filters of the other person, whatever they are. And both senders and receivers have a history and a personal communication style, and both of these can affect the interpretation of the message. And, another reason that communication is complicated is because it can and does take many forms other than the spoken word. And each of these forms of communication adds another layer of complexity. So there are 4 types of communication that we all experience and hopefully that we all use. And the first one is verbal communication. And, we all have control over the words that we use, but the meaning of those words might not be shared by the person that we're speaking to. And we have to think about things like differences in age and experience and background. All of these can result in differing interpretations of the same statement. And so the better we understand our own style and the styles of others, then we can adapt our verbal and all of our communication to fit the style of the person to whom we are communicating. Another type of communication is what's known as paraverbal. And it's not just the words that people say or we say, but it's also the way that we say it that communicates meaning. As I mentioned to you before, the coworker that says good morning or, says it in a sarcastic way, gives us some kind of a message. And this is what paraverbal communication is. It also includes things like how quickly someone speaks, whether someone pauses, whether someone talks in a sarcastic tone, for example, gives us messages. And, paraverbal cues very often help us to interpret the meaning of what someone is saying. So again, we go beyond the words and we look for the things that aren't being said, but how they're being said. And, like verbal communication, a mismatch of styles can make communication or interpretation of communication even more difficult. And consequently, understanding styles, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, can really enhance our reception. And then there's body language. How do people stand? Do they make eye contact or not? What do their facial expressions look like? Are they gesturing? Body language is a very, very heavy influence on our communication style. And, our preferences for body language, our preferences for things like eye contact, gesturing, all of these, lets other people know what our style is. So body language is such an important part of how we communicate. And then finally, and one that maybe we don't think about it as much, is personal space. And, the use of personal space is, includes things, not only the space between you and others if you're communicating verbally, but also things like, what does your workspace look like? What does your home space look like? All of those things are your personal space and communicates things to other people. And so these four types of communication are there for us to access. And as I mentioned to you, can also be a reason that communication sometimes there's a mismatch between the words that someone's saying and how they're saying them. So we have to consider the types of communication. So, what are some things to keep in mind as you are guided through effective communication? The first one is to realize that communication is unavoidable. All right, you can't not communicate. If you've ever taken a communication course, you might have seen that exact quote in the beginning of many textbooks on communication. You can't not communicate. It is unavoidable. If you participate in this webinar here this afternoon and you think to yourself, oh, this is way too complicated. I don't want to do this. It's too much. There's too much to think about. I'm just going to go home and lock myself in a closet. Hopefully somebody would notice, because that would be a very powerful form of communication if you were doing that. So you can't not communicate. You have to do it. And secondly, communication contains content and also information about the content. This is what I was just talking about, the paraverbal, the body language, the personal space. So there's the content of what we're communicating, but there's also additional information about this content. The third principle, the third practice is one that really has always been intriguing to me, and that is that communication very often produces conflict, but it's the only way for resolving conflict. So I don't know if any of you ever had this experience, but many times when we are in conflict with another person, and maybe the conflict occurred because we miscommunicated something, or maybe because we said something that other person found offensive, or maybe we didn't produce that report exactly at the time that they were expecting to receive it. So it's communication that has actually produced the conflict, but we have to communicate if we're going to resolve that conflict. And again, this is unfortunately many times when conflict occurs over miscommunication, what we do is we tend to stop communicating. And so it produces conflict, but it's also our only method for resolving conflict. Another thing is that communication is circular and it's complex. It's not linear. It's not, send, receive, send, receive, send, receive in a straight line, because there's so much more that goes into effective communication. We have to be aware of what's the environment that we're in, is this person able to receive this message that I'm getting ready to send them? So it's circular and it's very, very complex. And I think people that communicate in a way that is linear, that's I send, you receive, that's it, I'm done, very often find themselves disappointed in the fact that someone didn't quite get the message they intended, but they communicated it maybe in an environment that wasn't possible for the person to receive the message the way that they intended. So always keep in mind the fact that communication is circular and it is complex. And so we have to pay close attention to how we're delivering messages and where we're delivering. Another thing is it happens within an individual's frame of reference, and all of us have a frame of reference, and our frame of reference is something that we all developed as we were growing up, as we were developing as people. We developed this frame of reference, so it's very heavily tied to our background. It's very heavily tied to who we are as individuals and our family background, our history. So we have this frame of reference, and we all have different frames of references. And so that's another factor when it comes to communication, is that we have to think about, well, what's that other person's frame of reference? Those of you who are managers, and many of you in this group here this afternoon are managers, you know, maybe you have to provide some corrective feedback to someone on your team, and that person's frame of reference having to do with getting any kind of feedback on their performance was based on the fact that maybe as they were growing up, that wasn't done in a very positive way or a very developmental way. So even as adults, when they get feedback, they suddenly kind of tense up, and it's hard for them to listen. And that's, again, because of their individual frame of reference. And we can't change someone else's frame of reference, but we can certainly try to understand it and to try to communicate in a way that does fit into their individual frame of reference. And lastly, semantics matter. You know, words do not mean the same thing to all people. And for any of you that have ever traveled, even within, you know, if you're from the United States and you've traveled within the United States, or if you're not from the United States, you've traveled even within your own country, you know that words can have different meanings depending on where you're from, for example. And so I know when I first moved to Boston many long years ago, I moved here from Louisiana, and I honestly thought that I had moved to a foreign country because simple things were labeled differently by Bostonians, not, I mean, irrespective of their accent. You know, just common things that were in use had a different name in Boston than they did in Louisiana. So semantics matter, and you have to always consider that, is, you know, am I using words that actually mean the same thing to that person as they mean to you? So you might ask yourself, why bother? This, you know, already, Peggy, this is sounding much more complicated than I, you know, care to be engaged in. Well, there's a couple of compelling reasons. First of all, communication or miscommunication is cited as the #1 reason why relationships fail, why job performance is not what it needs to be, why sales are lost for those of you that are in sales organizations, and it's also cited as the #1 reason why customer service in so many organizations fails to satisfy the customers. So it's a pretty important topic, and it's something to for consideration, I think, in all of our relationships. And another couple of reasons, Peter Drucker, who maybe some of you know, Peter was a leading management theorist, and Peter once said, as soon as you move one step up from the bottom, your effectiveness depends on your ability to reach others through the spoken and written word. So as soon as you know, and I would say, you know, you don't even have to move one step up from the bottom. I think your effectiveness as a person, and certainly as an employee of an organization, it depends on your ability to reach others through the spoken and written word. And then Paul Meyer also said that communication, that human connection, is the key to personal and career success. But you know what? Sometimes it takes courage to communicate. And again, you know, communication, because it is the basis for all of our relationships, it means that sometimes we have to summon the courage to get a message across, or find the courage to listen to a message that someone else is giving to us. So sometimes it really does take courage to communicate. So we've explored some of the definition of communications and also some of the key principles. And as I mentioned when we started, each of us has a particular style of communicating. And I don't know if you've probably recognized this. I don't know if you've referred to it as style, but our communication style is how we act when we can do things in our own way. And our communication style is the style that is most natural and most comfortable for us. And, you know, the concept of personality style really dates back to 1914 and the work of a Swiss psychiatrist, Carl Jung, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, or you've studied him in psych classes. And Jung determined that although every person is unique, there are some categorical personality traits and behaviors that people share. And communication is one manifestation of our personality style. So our communication style really is about the behaviors that are so consistent that they're predictable, that someone else could predict them. It seems, you know, that anybody else could look at us or talk to us, and they would sort of know where we're coming from, and it's becomes expected by other people. Our communication style is something that once people determine that style, they expect us to react or to act and to communicate in that way most of the time. So, for example, let's say, you know, hopefully all of us, I hope all of us, is friendly. All of us are friendly people. But sometimes there's someone who acts incredibly friendly, more than the average person. And so other people who know that individual start to consider friendliness as part of that person's personality. And they expect friendly behavior most of the time. And so when they don't experience friendly behavior from whoever that person is, of course they realize, and maybe rightfully so, that something's wrong or that something's not quite working for that person. So again, it's behavior that's so consistent that other people find it typical and find it predictable. So what are the benefits of understanding communication style? Because again, it's like, oh, it's one more thing I have to think about. Well, there's some pretty compelling reasons for understanding your communication style and the style of other people. And the first is that it helps to improve your interaction with other people. It makes it easier to understand the behavior of other people when you can assess what is that person's communication style, and then I'll talk a little bit later about, and then maybe flex your style in order to be most effective with them. Knowing about style also helps others interpret your behavior, so that they can sort of predict what's the best way if they have to get a message to you and a message through to you. What's the best approach for them to take? And it helps you then interpret other people's behavior as well. And bottom line is, and I'm a real believer in this, is that understanding style influences your success. If you understand communication style, it helps you to choose professions or interactions that really do suit you and really are suited to your style. And so I think it really influences your success. When you understand your communication style, then you know that I could be really effective in this arena, but maybe not so much in this arena. So I think it really does influence your success. So I hope I have piqued your interest enough to where you're sort of sitting there at your desk thinking, okay, so wonder what's my communication style? So that's the next question. What is your communication style? So I want to describe the communication style paradigm for you so that you understand how it's designed. And this is HRDQ's style assessment, based on the style assessment. But the first dimension of style is assertiveness. And assertiveness is the effort that a person makes to influence or control the thoughts or the actions sometimes of other people. And people who are assertive tell others how things should be, or tend to be very task-oriented, very active, and very confident people. And people who are less assertive ask other people how things should be and are very process-oriented and very deliberate and very attentive. And assertiveness is a good thing. I think assertiveness has at times gotten a bad rap. I get very, very upset when I hear people describing someone who is aggressive and they call them assertive. There's a huge difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. So, but we all have a certain level of assertiveness. And again, we're either, on the strong side, or that's not, we're less assertive than someone else. And then a second dimension of style is our expressiveness. And expressiveness is the effort that a person makes to control his or her emotions when relating to other people. So, for example, people who are expressive display their emotions, and they tend to be very demonstrative people. They tend to be very versatile people, very sociable people. And people who are less expressive tend to tamp that down a little bit. They control their emotions. They tend to be a little bit more private, a little bit more independent, a little bit more focused. So assertiveness and expressiveness are the two dimensions of style. So again, this is the HRDQ communication style model. And if you look around the edges, you see the two measures of assertiveness. You see the two measures of assertiveness at top to bottom, and then you see expressiveness on either sides. So the upper half of the diagram, direct and systematic style, are lower in expressiveness. Okay, lower in expressiveness, and the two styles on the right-hand side of the diagram that you see here, spirited and considerate, are higher in expressiveness. And then if you look at the lower half of the diagram, those two styles, systematic and considerate, are lower in assertiveness, and then the upper half, direct and spirited, have a higher level of assertiveness. So another way of looking at, or to thinking about assertiveness and expressiveness, is to think about asking versus telling. So for example, low assertion is asking. High assertion, people with those people in the high assertiveness categories of direct and spirited, high assertive people tend to tell. And then control, the bottom half, controlling versus displaying emotions. So for example, systematic people have low expressiveness, and then considerate people have high expressiveness. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about these four styles. And as I describe them, I want you to consider which one sounds the most like you. Now, again, you're probably, as I describe them, you might say, well, that's a little bit like me, that's a little bit like me, that's a little bit like me. And you're absolutely right. However, what I want you to really think about is when I am at my most natural and most comfortable, which one of these four styles sounds the most like me? So listen to the descriptions, and then you be the one to decide which one sounds the most like you. So direct people are folks that like to take charge of their lives. And some people would say direct people like to take charge of their lives, and they'd like to take charge of the lives of other people as well. If you have a direct communication style, you prefer to be in control, and you tend to be very decisive in your actions, okay? Direct people thrive on competition and winning. And the competition, by the way, is not necessarily something like competitive sports, although it might be, but it's competition in terms of making sure that they're making progress towards their goal. So they're always trying to win and to make sure that they're moving forward. They maintain a fast pace as they work kind of single-mindedly on their goals. You know, they want to get there. They definitely want to get there. So direct people are typically good in positions of authority, and particularly positions that require a lot of independence. They possess strong leadership skills, and many people who are in leadership positions in organizations tend to have a direct communication style. And the direct people who are direct like to take risks, and they're not at all afraid about taking risks, because again, very often that risk represents a win for them, and so that's something that they're not at all afraid or concerned about doing. The next group are the spirited communication style, and spirited people are very enthusiastic, and they're friendly. They prefer, above all else, to be around other people, and spirited people really thrive in the spotlight. They do very, very well at positions and work assignments that require them to be in the spotlight and to be out in front of other people. They're typically able to generate motivation and excitement in other people because of their liveliness and their kind of positive nature. They're very fast-paced. They prefer stimulation, and again, they're very well suited to high-profile positions that require them to kind of be the front-facing person of an organization or a department within an organization. They're very spontaneous. They don't like necessarily to have things planned out well in advance. They're always sort of waiting for the last minute to make sure that they're taking the best possible opportunity. And people who are spirited really do excel at building alliances and at using relationships in a positive way to get the work done. So these are the folks that are really outstanding at networking, for example. Next are our considerate, is the considerate style. And people who are considerate by and far are, they value warm personal relationships, and as a result of this, they tend to be, of all the styles, the best listeners. They're also the best counselors, and people go to people with a considerate style because they're good listeners, and that's why other people seek them out. Considerate people are very cooperative, and they enjoy being a part of a team. As a matter of fact, they would probably not do well at all in a work environment where they couldn't be part of a team, because that's what's very gratifying to them. They're always aware of other people's feelings, and they're the ones who'll ask the question, well, if somebody's presenting a new idea in a team meeting or whatever, they'll be the ones to say, well, I think that might have an impact on this group over here. Have we asked them how they're going to feel about that, or do we know how they're going to respond to that change? Considerate people are very reliable. They're very steady. If you have them on a project team or whatever, you can really count on the considerate person to fulfill their responsibilities. They're reliable and steady, and that's just a part of who they are. And people who are considerate work very best. They're very well suited for any position that requires them to care for others. So all of the caring professions, for example, and some of you, I know some percentage of you here are from healthcare. People in the caring professions are very likely have a considerate communication style. So the final style are systematic folks. And people who are systematic are very, as their style name implies, they're very organized and orderly. They're very accurate, and they're very objective. They prefer to make decisions based on fact and not necessarily or at all based on emotion. They rely on data, and these are the people who are your excellent problem solvers. You know, if there's a problem to be solved, you really want to make sure that you have someone with a systematic style that's part of that problem solving process, part of that problem solving teams. They tend to be very persistent in their analyses and are able to kind of maintain a critical focus throughout their work. You know, they leave the feeling part of it, the emotional part of it out, and they're able to really keep that critical focus on, you know, what are the objective facts? What are the accurate facts that we know? Systematic people prefer to work in a very organized environment where there are clear guidelines, where there are ways of doing things that are documented and adhered to by other people in the work group. So they thrive really in task-oriented positions that require a lot of independent work. Someone with a predominantly systematic style would prefer that and work best in that kind of environment. So here's a summary of the last 4 slides that I've just been through with you. And I want you to identify in which area of this diagram do you place yourself. And again, I know that you probably said, well, that's a little bit me, that's a little bit me, but I really want you to think about, where do you feel most comfortable and at home? It's where you feel most authentically yourself, your happy place, if you will. So I want you to find your happy place. And again, some of you might feel that you exhibit traits that are more than one style, but where do you feel the most you? What quadrant best describes your particular style? And once again, we're going to launch a poll, and I'm going to ask you to identify, and this is anonymous, so don't worry about it, which of these 4 styles is your predominant style? Which of these 4 styles is your predominant style? Again, make sure that you hit submit once you choose. Okay, looks like we have most of you voting here, 85%. So let's see what these look like. All right. So it looks like considerate. The bulk of you consider yourself to be considerate, and then we're pretty much tied with the other 3 styles. But again, as you can see in this group of, I can't remember how many of you are on the call, 379 of you. It's pretty evenly split, really. Again, with a slight dominance of those of you being in the considerate style, and so this is what we would expect to see. Certainly in a group this size, we would expect to see almost a kind of an even distribution. And if you were a very large team all working on something together, this would be a good spread to have all of the 4 styles represented. So now that you've determined your predominant style, I want you to think about, or we want to talk a little bit about, the fact that there are some trouble spots. And you know, each style has its flip side of the traits that I just described to you. And it's sort of like too much of a good thing, if you will. And these are your blind spots. And it can happen sometimes when we carry our strength to excess. You know, so if we tend to be that spirited person, and we're so spirited that other people, like, you know, they see you coming down the hall and they take a quick, you know, left so that they don't have to encounter your energy or your enthusiasm or whatever. So, you know, blind spots sometimes are just about carrying what we do well too extreme, or not really being aware of our style, and again overusing it. So it's really good to be aware of your blind spots, so that it helps you to balance your strengths, so that you're not overusing them. And I want to review the trouble spots for each of the 4 styles. And as I do, I want you to think about, what can I do to limit that particular behavior? Because again, we want to make sure that we are limiting those behaviors that tend to be a trouble spot for us. So if you're a direct person, if that was the style, and again, some 17% of you identified as being direct, you want to make sure that you don't cross the line from being controlling to being overbearing. All right. You're wanting to get things done quickly. However, if you need other people to be on board, if you need other people to be part of that initiative, then sometimes you have to, maybe the timeline isn't going to be exactly as you had determined. So the timeline might, if it involves other people and it involves getting other people tied into a concept, an idea, an innovation, whatever, you might have to slow that down in order to do that. Make sure that you're not overlooking facts and known facts, because that very often can lead to mistakes. So don't overlooking the details, and don't view every situation as a competition, okay? Because many people don't view things that way, and you might make other people feel uncomfortable if everything is a competition. And direct people might become workaholics when they carry their strengths to an extreme. And again, when that happens, far too often our physical health suffers as a result of it. Certainly our mental health suffers as a result of it. And so that's a real caution for those of you who have predominantly a direct style. Spirited people need to tend to, again, intensify their verbal behavior. And so they might exaggerate a story for effect, or they might respond very verbally and very loudly to someone else, what they perceive to be an attack from someone else. So making sure that you're really listening to criticism, making sure that you're listening for the details and not kind of jumping to conclusions. Recognizing that, drama is not always something that's comfortable for everyone. So trying not to be overly dramatic, but, having the appropriate affect for what's going on or what needs to be done, or, what the good news is or whatever, but trying not to be overly dramatic. And sometimes spirited people don't manage their time very well. And so that's something, or don't manage their time very efficiently. And so that's something to be aware of as well. Considerate people tend to avoid change and also conflict. And so clearly that's a trouble spot for people who are considerate, because change and conflict are part of being alive, and certainly part of being part of any group, be it a work group or any other kind of group that we're a part of. So considerate people really have to think about, am I avoiding this change simply because change isn't always comfortable for me, or is there something about this change that's really not good, or that I need to know more about? Considerate people need to recognize that other people need to know what they're thinking. So keeping their opinions to themselves doesn't really help. And again, in an effort to not offend anyone, or maybe not to sort of make any waves, considerate people sometimes won't say what they think. So making sure that you're saying what needs to be said and not what you think other people want to hear. And then finally, systematic people. Again, that focus too much on details and not really thinking about, okay, I hear the details, I have the details. Now, I wonder what else goes along with this. I wonder how people are feeling about it. So, recognizing that if you put accuracy ahead of feelings all of the time, you might not be getting the best kind of outcome. Not fearing personal disclosure is a trouble spot. And so systematic people have to recognize that in order to get from other people, sometimes we have to give a little. And that doesn't mean everybody has to know, every detail about us, but people have to know enough so that they can communicate with us and react to us in a appropriate way. And systematic people can be terse and need to think about that. And so, really, again, sort of taking some time and not always just trying to, just the facts, let's get the facts, let's move on. So again, there are trouble spots for all of our styles. And remember, we all need to ask ourselves the question, what can I do to limit this particular trouble spot or the trouble spots that I have in my particular style? And, your communication style and the communication style of other people in your office may well be different. Okay. As a matter of fact, I would say that for most people, the chances are that there are other people who are in your immediate orbit that have a style that's different from you. So how do we get along with people who have different communication styles? The strongest differences in style will be if you have a style that is diametrically opposed to someone that's in your orbit, a colleague, a boss, a partner, a spouse, whoever. When you're diametrically opposed, that's when you're going to have the most difficulty in communicating. So, for example, a direct style is going to have the most difficulty with people who are considerate. Likewise, a spirited person is going to have the most difficulty with someone who's systematic. So who in your world might be your style opposite? So we're going to do this one final poll here, and I want everybody to consider someone that's important to you. So maybe it's your direct supervisor, a key team member, a family member. And I want you to answer this poll. What is the relationship of their style to your style? Is it the same? Is it different but diametrically opposite? Or is it a style, is it a different style but not diametrically opposite? Or is it a style that is diametrically opposite of yours? So everybody take a moment and tell me what is that person's style that's important in your world. Okay, so it looks like that the bulk of you, and we can stop that right now, if we can stop the poll, thanks Sarah. It looks like for most of you, you have a different style, but it's not diametrically opposite to yours. And so good for you. It's different, so you have the advantages of a different style, but it's not diametrically opposite. Although 36% of you said that you're diametrically opposite of that important person in your world. So obviously, you have to give some consideration to that, and you have to ask yourself, how can I most effectively communicate with that person who is diametrically opposite to me? Now, a question I'm often asked is, what about communication in teams? Oops, sorry, let me just go back to that other slide. Oh, all right. When it comes to teams, there's no right or wrong style. Teams need all four types. That's why I said to you, if you were a very big team of 370 people or whatever, we'd be in pretty good shape because you sort of represented in pretty equal numbers, the four styles. So the best teams are the ones that have similar representation from all four styles, okay? Because we really improve our chances of successfully connecting and communicating with another when we're able to style flex. And think about what would a team of all direct people be like? Well, it would be hard to tell like who was in charge if everybody was direct. If everybody was spirited, it might be like a lot of fun, but what would we get the work done? If everybody was considerate, it might be very caring and warm and kumbaya, but would we actually get the work done? Or if it was very systematic, it might be a little bit hard to think about how we could figure out how people were feeling about what we did. So one of the analogies that I've used for a long time, and someone told me about it long ago, was the notion of how do the four styles get to be? So I want you to imagine, if you can, that I'm standing in a room at a point called A, and I need to get to another place in the room called B. It's across the room. So if I'm direct, okay, the way I'm going to get to B is I'm just going to go. I'm not going to ask any questions. I know I'm at A, I need to get to B, I'm just going to go. If I'm spirited, and I'm at A and I need to get to B, I'm going to make sure that everybody knows that I'm going to B. All right. If I'm systematic and I'm at A and I need to go to B, I'm probably going to check for directions. And I might even take a few steps and then come back to make sure that we're really supposed to go to B. And if I'm considerate, I'm probably going to ask other people, would you like to come to B? I'm going to B. How would you feel about going to B? So the moral of the story is that all four styles get to B. We go about it in slightly different ways, but we all get to B. So what we have to learn to do is we have to learn how to style flex. We have to know how to flex our style according to the person that we're trying to communicate with. And just like gradually improving your trouble spots, it takes effort to flex to another style, but there's a big payoff to it. It means that you have more productive interaction and better communication with that person. So let's take a quick look, and we're almost out of time here, but of flexing to the four styles. If you have to flex to someone who's direct, you want to keep in mind the fact that they want to go to B. So focus on, being organized, making sure that you are presenting the facts and that you keep that relationship business-like, that you ask questions directly. If you're flexing to a spirited style, you want to make sure that you have a lot of energy and a lot of creativity and that you brainstorm with them and that you're supportive of their ideas and you allow them to share their ideas very freely. If you're flexing to a considerate style, you want to focus on their You want to focus on the relationship. You want to be very supportive of their feelings. You want to have kind of relaxed pace and give them some time to build trust in you. And then finally, if you're flexing to a systematic style, you want to focus on the facts, not just opinions. Provide data when it's possible and avoid gimmicks. And I'm often asked this question too, which is how can I quickly gauge someone's style who I've never met before? And you'll have this in your handouts, but you'll see that this is actually a great little chart to tell you about, if you're just meeting someone for the first time, how can you gauge what their style might be? Well, you listen to how they talk. You look at how they listen. You figure out if you shook their hand, what kind of a handshake is it? What does their personal space look like? What kind of movements are they making? And what does their workspace look like? And that will give you some suggestion of what that person's style is and then what you have to do to flex to their style. So keep in mind, again, your dominant style is the one that is most comfortable. There's no one right style. They're all good. The best teams represent all of the four styles, and it really helps you to know what your trouble spots are and to practice improving those. And you can flex to communicate other people's style, and that's really what makes for the most successful interchanges. And remember, we all get to be. It's just a matter of how we get there. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and I'm going to turn this over in this last minute back over to Sarah.
All right, Peggy, thank you so much. Peggy's contact screen is on that slide right there. If you have any questions for her, don't hesitate to reach out. And Peggy, could you just go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
Thank you. We do not have time for that live Q&A, but attendees, please go ahead, send your questions into that chat box. We'll actually be following up in an email with those unanswered questions in the next few days. And then if you're interested, the foundation of today's program is on what's my communication style. And right now we're offering a 50% discount. So go over to HRDQstore.com and just use that coupon code at checkout. So Peggy, thanks again. Would you just like to add any final thoughts before I wrap up then?
No, just thanks everyone for your participation, and I hope your communication style works well for you going forward. Thanks everyone.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, thank you again, Peggy, and everyone on the line. We appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Thanks all, bye.